Hello everybody, it's me ALBATROSS. Welcome back. Don't get too excited because things take a pretty dark turn in this tale that we are talking about of Moses trying to get the Israelites out of Egypt. Via, he didn't want to do this. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind that we've learned thus far. He didn't want to do this. He was just fine living in Midian with his wife and his children, his pleasant sounding father-in-law. He would have been fine to do that. He was approached to come here, but then, upon coming there and trying, then he makes life even harder for the Israelites. So that's kind of like where we're at now. We are on, how many plagues have we gone through? Okay, we had the plague of the water, the snakes, the frog, no, not the snakes, sorry, no snakes. Frogs, gnats, we've had flies. Now we're on the livestock. And basically, the livestock is also selected. Like, it's not all the livestock, it's just the livestock belonging to the Egyptians. And it's a plague that kills them, kills them stone dead. But none of the animals of the Israelites get affected. However, the Pharaoh, he's like, I'm still not going to let them go. And it's also another important thing to keep in mind, too. We get it confused, let my people go, free them. But, that's not really what he's asking for. He's not even asking for them to be freed permanently, okay? He's asking if they can go to the desert for 3 days to celebrate and sacrifice. And they don't want to do it there because, remember, their sacrifices are so abhorrent and terrible in the Egyptians' eyes that they would all get stoned to death. Which is most likely when they sacrifice their firstborn sons. But also, because the same one instigating all this, the same one, is also admitting that he's convincing Pharaoh not to do it. So he's basically saying he's behind this whole controversy. Yahweh. He's the one who's making Moses go ask Pharaoh to free the people, and he's the one insinuating that Pharaoh not free them. Same one. Which is also, a huge pattern with what we read in the Willie Lynch letter. If anyone's read that, it'll be linked below. But, that's a thing, that's one of the main things you do in the beginning, is you separate people, picking whatever differences there are. And, obviously that began with Abraham, separating each son and each one of their descendants, putting one above the other, favoring one above the other, just basically making things as difficult as possible for them to ever get along. But anyways, let me not get too ahead of myself. So, after the livestock, then, since he still won't let them go and do their creepy ritual sacrifice. Oh, but wait, before I move on to the next plague, in Exodus 9, verses 5 to 6, you see that this time for the livestock plague, there was no staff that was used. This time, it was just Yahweh set a time and a day and said that, if they're not let go, you're going to wake up the next day and all your livestock's going to be dead. And that's essentially what happened. Moses and Aaron didn't even do anything with that. So, yeah. And this next plague also does not involve a staff. For this next plague, it was the plague of boils. And there was no staff used. Basically, what he had Moses do was, in the presence of Pharaoh, specifically, he would take ashes from the furnace and just throw them in the air. And then, all the people and the animals in Egypt would have boils, would be covered head to toe in boils. And when it was the magician's turn to repeat the same thing, well, obviously they were covered in boils and couldn't do it. But what happens? You would think that he would let them go then, right? After all of that. But Exodus 9, verse 12, it tells us that no, that's not what happens. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron. Just as, Yahweh said to Moses. And this time it was a hailstorm, and it did involve the staff. It involved Moses holding the staff up to the sky. And the hail basically destroyed, everything that was, wasn't in shelter. All the trees, all the plants. It destroyed a lot. And then it's at this point, Pharaoh, says, I've messed up. All right, I've sinned. So, he says he let them go. And then as soon as, the hail and stuff stops, big surprise, Pharaoh changes his mind. It doesn't say if Yahweh had anything to do with that, but, it's just a guess. You would think he would have, had, virtually enough at this point, but... So then we get to the plague of locusts. And I want to read this verse to you real quick. It is to show you why exactly... the ultimate end game for Yahweh and all this. Exodus 10, verses 1 to 2. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." So it's almost like he's doing it either to stroke his ego, or the more likely situation, it's the mind control. It's the fear to keep everyone obedient. That's just my speculation and opinion, and I am allowed to have that. And, just like he says, Pharaoh, doesn't want to let them go. And as Moses and Aaron are walking out, his officials, maybe their hearts aren't so hardened, because they're like, look, this guy is a menace. Just let them go. For God's sakes. Let them go and do their festival. So Pharaoh sends them back, brings them back. And he questions them a little bit more about this festival. He wants to know who exactly is going to be going, what's going to be going, and all this other stuff. And Moses answers that they're going to go with their young, their old, their sons, their daughters, and their flocks and their herds, because they're going to celebrate a festival. And here's what Pharaoh had to say. Exodus 10:10. Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you. If I let you go, along with your women and children, clearly you are bent on evil." Now I want to pause because there's a footnote there. The other possible translation could be, or be careful, trouble is in store for you. And then Pharaoh says something that I find very interesting in verse 11. He's like, no, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for. Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. So you could say it was a compromise. Maybe Pharaoh was just concerned they wouldn't come back. Or another possibility, maybe he knew that they were planning on doing some child sacrifices out there, and he weren't having no parts of it. It would kind of explain his resistance to do this, to let them do that. A little bit, I guess. I don't know. A little more so than, what the reason he's been giving now. I don't know. That's just a thought. That's a speculation. So don't read too much into that. But he clearly didn't trust him to go out there with the women and children, though. I'm just saying. Maybe he just didn't want them to leave. But guess what? So it was a somewhat compromise. He was going to let them go, but it was only going to be the men. But guess what? Yahweh didn't like that. So he pretty much told Aaron and Moses to do the swarm of locusts anyway. And so they did. And it says that there had never, ever been before any such plague of locusts ever in the history of all of Egypt. So then, Pharaoh was like, okay, fine, whatever. Do whatever you want. Just get rid of these locusts. So Moses does. He has asked Yahweh to get rid of the locusts, and a west wind comes in, drives them to the Red Sea. And then get this. Exodus 10, verse 20. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and he wouldn't let them go. Still wouldn't let them go. So now we get to the plague of darkness. And in Exodus 10, verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt. So, like, this wasn't like the darkness in the sense where it was like dark and there was no light. Because it says in verse 23 that they had light on in the places where they lived, but they didn't, so it wasn't like that kind of darkness. I don't know what kind of darkness they're talking about, but that is very strange. It's strange. So Pharaoh summons Moses back, and he, like, kind of relents, and he's like, okay, fine, you can take the women and children, but leave the livestock. And, I imagine by then, since all their livestock was dead, that they, probably needed some of it. But Moses refused. He couldn't leave a single animal behind. Not a hoof would be left behind. The reason being was he didn't know what he would have to use until he got there. Well, Yahweh hardens Pharaoh's heart again. And then he's like, you know what? Just get out of here. The next time you come in here, you're not going to come out, basically. And Moses like, okay, just as you say, I'll never come back again. Which is never good. And that leads us to the final plague. And I will come down and do a full breakdown because this is like a really deep thing. This is kind of like basically the beginning of all like the Israelite specific rituals and whatnot. That's like wild. Like up until this point, I don't think they've even, other than like, yeah, they've done like their little sacrifices and whatnot before, but this is when it starts to become ritual. And we'll get into that when I come back. So it gets a little deep and dark. Stay tuned.